Welcome to the Personal Process Podcast. On this episode, we have my man, Arron. Arron is someone who does a lot of things from throwing probably the hardest kick on the West Coast from his karate skills that now transitioned to MMA and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu to starting his own company at Meaningful Work and now transitioning to his role as a digital marketing specialist. He has a lot to offer for our show. And I think there's going to be a little piece on mental health that we're going to be covering today, why it's important. And yeah, with that said, Arron, is there anything that I didn't mention for an interview that you'd like to chime in on?
No, I think you got pretty much everything.
My man, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for taking the time. We've been trying to schedule this for a while. Both of us are pretty busy, so I'm happy that we had the opportunity to do this.
No, my pleasure. Honestly, thank you very much for having me.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, Arron, I just want to jump right into it, man. Like, what got you to start your company? Because you're a co-founder of Meaningful Work. So, what was the thought process that you're like, you know what, I'm just going to start a company?
That's a really good question. Like most things, I probably just fell into it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess I just like marketing in general. So for me, it was anytime anybody has like a project that they were working on, it was my first question is always like, hey, do you need a marketing person? Especially since I was still like at the time building my portfolio. My degree was not marketing related, doing economics. So any experience I could get was just like a bonus for me. So at the time, actually, this was like right at the beginning of pandemic. So I had an abundance of free time, and I was just grabbing a coffee with a friend of mine that we worked together in a project, kind of like a mock company for a year and a half. So we already had experience working together. And, we were just grabbing coffee, just catching up. And he was telling me about his idea that he had for this kind of company where they could, well, I guess his idea was just to connect companies that wanted to give back with nonprofits or organizations that needed some help. And that sounded interesting to me. And of course, my question was like, can I help? And then from there, it kind of just took off, as I had more and more free time, I just sunk more and more of that time into it.
That's incredible. And, starting a company and running it for the length that you've done had to be difficult. Is there anything that kind of surprised you that you weren't thinking of when you first started this company?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're just so like, which one should I pick?
So many. That's funny. My roommate and I he also does marketing. We're always like talking about like the lessons along the way. Yeah, there's so many. One that sticks out for me personally is, I guess, the small things that I guess just being like a little more assertive for me was like the biggest thing. I guess knowing when to choose and pick your battles.
For me, tell me about that.
I guess as soon as it's really interesting because the second you start a company and you involve one more other person, it's no longer yours. It's ours, for better and for worse. So for me, that was just it was a new thing. I didn't even know what like shareholders agreements were. Like I of course like knew them theoretically in class, but like to actually put one together and having those really uncomfortable conversations, those were just like new to me. And I guess I'm definitely a bit more experienced knowing like when to push and when to lay low.
For sure. So you're mentioning uncomfortable conversations. So there's a lot of people now that want to start their own business, but perhaps they don't know what these uncomfortable conversations are about. Can you give me an example of something that would be uncomfortable?
Yes. Well, the most important one, what slice of the pie do you want? How big is your slice?
Take me through that. Like, how was that experience like?
Excuse me. For me, I'm just like not necessarily the most confrontational person. It's something I work with, I work on, I should say, just being more assertive. So That was awkward, especially since this was during the pandemic. So we were an entirely remote company. We like for the most part, meaningful work, I believe, still is almost like entirely remote, which is really cool. Um, but it also made personal conversations like that, as well as like conflicts, it made things a little bit more tricky and challenging. Um, but especially when no one is saying anything, like those Zoom calls where it's just crickets.
Yeah,
Um, those things are just uncomfy, you know? Or I'll give you an example.
please.
Um, it's always like a common, like a fun entrepreneur's like thought experiment. Um, what do you think is worth more, the idea or the execution? Um, you know,
Hmm.
somebody else may have had the first idea, but the idea is, you know, just an idea, you know? Um, so the execution, that's a whole different thing, but that's just one example of like one real conversation that came up.
Right. And for those who don't know the premise of this, like, what do you mean by the idea and execution of something? Like, because I think I know what you're talking about, but if you could
Mhm.
just make it a little
Oh
easier for
yeah.
those who are a little bit new to entrepreneurship.
Oh, absolutely. The idea is just like the business idea, the initial concept, the solution that you're offering to the world, the problem that you're solving. The execution is how you're going to package and process and release that solution to the world. Uh, for example, there's many restaurants, and some do really well, and some do like fail um, with really similar ideas. Like so, that's just one example. Does that make things a little more clear?
Yeah, no, for sure. And what side of the argument are you on for that one, Aaron? I'm just curious. What do you think?
Execution,
Why
100%.
is that?
Um, for me, it just made like the most logical sense. I mean, when I heard when I because obviously I learned this from like school, SFU, excellent entrepreneurship program. That's my plug. Simon Fraser University. But yeah, it just makes a lot of sense because essentially it's just like the dream without any kind of tangible uh,
Path.
path. Yeah,
There's
it's just a dream. It's not a goal. Like there's no deadlines. Um,
it's kind of like giving someone an IOU, right? It's like, yeah, that's great. That's a great idea that you have over there, but until I have money in my hands, like, what does it mean, right?
exactly. It's your actions. You have to. It really is just about execution. And I think that's the most important thing because and that just comes with like experience, right?
Absolutely. And I think speaking on execution, I want to kind of bring it back to the concept of meaningful work. Because when I first saw you start this, I was kind of intrigued in a couple ways. Because, you know, Aaron, me and you actually first met when we were both doing sandwich runs in the downtown east side. So we both kind of had that compassionate field. And for you to show that empathy and caringness to your venture, it was very interesting to me for a couple of things. First of all, because I thought it was awesome. But the second piece is I was wondering how you could take such a brilliant idea that helps the community and actually make money from it. Like, how does that work?
It's a really good question. That's the $1 million question. Um, I guess the way it works is I one thing at least like there was a big paradigm shift for me was at least when I was like learning more about entrepreneurship and actually doing it. Um, I used to think it was a bit of a zero sum game. You
What do you
know,
mean by that?
somebody's on top of the business world, so some that means is there somebody on the bottom of the business world? And I was like, no, 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 no. That's at least for me, my perspective. That's no longer the case.
What
I
changed that
think
for you?
to be honest, just like learning more about business and like what it means to actually have a business or why businesses are successful, which in my opinion is because they're solving people's problems. So for me, that just became it became a shift rather than like taking the competitiveness, because some people, that is what drives them. I was always interested in like stocks when I was a kid. So I was like, oh, for me, it's like the game. I want to like see it go up and down. It was interesting. But for me to take that like competitiveness, and then I kind of shifted to see like how much value could I add? Like if my whole, if business in general is just adding value to people's lives, like what's the limit then? Let's just see how much good could I do? And can I make money doing it? I think, it was just a fun, for me, it was like, let's find out.
Right. And like I'm gonna dig into this, man, because I'm still like, how do you make money on this? Because do you mind explaining a little bit more about how meaningful work works and kind of just like the macro elements and how the business works of it? Because I found that really intriguing, and I think you're helping people get experience from the little that I knew about the company, and you're also making money from it. And I don't know, man, it's just crazy.
I will say, I don't think I saw real dollars. So we were still pre-revenue.
Pre-revenue.
Pre-revenue. But that was, I've left since then. That was last year. So that's a really good question. It's like, to be honest, it's just been like a lot of pivoting.
What do you mean by pivoting? What does pivoting mean to the person who doesn't know anything about business?
That's a great question.
I just got a lot of them today.
When one idea doesn't work, we just make a slight change, try a different path, and see if you can, take what you have and apply it in a slightly different way. And will that solve the solution? That's just a basic pivot. You're just slight, variation.
Slight little modulation. Yeah. So
Yes.
You just kept pivoting. And how did you kind of, until the point that you were there last year, what was the point that kind of seemed to work at your position?
I'm not sure. Like while I was there, I can comfortably say like we figured it out. I think it was still a lot of like discovery. And what I mean is a lot of problem discovery. So sometimes just like, somebody that built something, falls in love with their creation. Somebody who's creating a startup or building a business, they fall in love and it's their baby. But sometimes you get married or you fall in love with the solution rather than the problem that you're trying to solve. So it always has to come back to how do we solve the problem, and are we solving the right problem? So a lot of the discovery was around just problem discovery. So just talking to people, like, what are your needs? Are they being met? What are you doing right now to, satisfy those needs? Is that working for you?
For sure.
Yeah. And then through that, it would also be like customer discovery. So, okay, we've built something that we think could solve this problem. Is there like a market for this? Ideally, you do that research. You do that first, but does the customer in our head, do they exist? Because when people say, wow, I would totally love one of those, is very different to like handing you money and being like, give that to me right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. A lot of people say like, oh, that's a great idea, I do this. But until they put their money where their words are, it's kind of not worth too much. So with this in line, how did you actually go about talking to people to make it right? Because, I'm assuming these aren't just your friends that you're talking to. Is that correct? Like, did you contact people in the community? How did you go about that? Like, what are the actual steps to do this?
That's a really good question. Honestly, it's most of the things that you could think of, we probably did. So the cold calling, the showing up at random places and being like, hey, how's it going? Asking your relatives that might be somehow involved in a nonprofit for an introduction. So yeah, essentially just like networking, just trying places, and then, making those connections. Because I guess it's hard to create something and serve a community if you're not a part of that community.
That's an important point you just mentioned here. It's hard to create something and serve a community if you're not part of that community. That's huge. And that's a very good point. I think in whatever field you go into, if you have a business, you need to be part of the place that you're trying to sell to. Because if you're just an outsider, no one's going to want to support you. That
Mhm.
was a very powerful piece, man. I'm happy I caught on to that one.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So I guess from this networking approach, you've tried everything and you've seen kind of what worked, what's optimized. I'm wondering what tips you have. If you have to give like 2 to 3 tips, what would you say would be the best pieces for this engagement?
Mm,
Putting it on the spot here. So
oh, yeah. I would say mm, try your immediate network first. That's probably my biggest one. Rather than if you can start in warm rather than cold, uh, that's amazing. And for anybody that is, university aged or is a student, always start with the fact that you're a student, because most people that I found through experience, they're more willing to talk to you and answer your questions when they're helping a student rather than a business owner or market researcher that wants to just find facts about them.
Hmm,
So for us, because we were, all students, and we were actually, you know, being funded through SFU's Venture Connections through a series of grants and prizes, um, we just led with that. Hey, we're a startup trying to do some good in our community. We're, you know, built. This is built by students in our free time. Like, we have some questions we want to learn. So that's my like biggest tip. If you're a student, just tell people you're a student and they'll want to help you. I promise.
that's huge. Right on. Okay. And let's pivot a little bit here. Like, so the whole startup scene is very glamour rich. You know, everyone from Gary Vee to everyone's, I don't know, everyone's grandma seems to be opening up a startup right now.
Yeah.
But like, what's the actual experience been like? Like, tell me about like kind of how you felt in a normal day, the highs of it, and like the lows of it. These are like three big questions. I'm giving you a lot right now, aren't I, Aaron?
I'm getting like flashbacks, like the, artillery shells in the background, tears. Yeah, a lot of highs and lows. Absolutely. Um, okay, I like to end on good notes. So I'll start with the lows and then we'll go to the highs.
That's a
But
good way to do it.
the lows are the obvious. I mean, there's no money. You don't know when you don't know if or when you're going to get money. Um, you're trying to find a solution. You're trying to find a new solution to a problem. So you don't know if you're doing it right because no one's done it this way before. That has a certain amount of fear. So it's the fear of the unknown. Plus, it's just it's the real life stresses. Rent becomes like a struggle. The perpetual ramen noodles. Quick tip: if anybody is on this ramen noodle diet, switch to potatoes. I'm sure they're filling and probably more nutrient dense. And then it's just the rejection, and it's the burnout. I would
What
say those are the big lows.
what rejections are you talking about here?
Or I guess
Kind of just going through lots of failures and until something hits.
yeah, I guess so. Rejections, or I guess like failures, is like a better way to put it.
Right.
So it's just like keep like those darts on the dartboard. Like,
Right.
oh, that didn't work. Oh, the other one, like this one didn't work.
Right.
And honestly, the hours catch up with you. Like, I had a full time job, so it was still the 40 hours a week plus the, you know, 20 hours or as much time as I could put into it. So before work and then after work and then on weekends. So those were like some of the lows because it was definitely like emotionally stressful. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And before we go into the normal day-to-day feels of, running a company, like how did you get through these lows? Like what kept you motivated? Because I think I'm interested in that. A lot of people are saying that, if something sucks, I'll just stop. Like what kept you going?
Um, a few things. First, I was fortunate enough to like be living with one of my best friends as a roommate. So she kind of saw, she probably was like up when she saw like my like the midnight oil burning at 5 a.m. I'm like crying over like some content that has to be released this day. Like that's a true story that like actually happened.
Right.
So and then my like lovely girlfriend, and like I had like a support network, so that was part of it. And then the second part of it is it kind of goes back to what I said in the beginning. As soon as you involve somebody else in your company, it's no longer just yours, it's ours.
Mm-hmm.
So then it became, oh, it's not just me I'm letting down, it's us I'm letting down if I don't complete my tasks. So for me, when, if it was just me, I might have slacked a little more, but because
Right.
I knew I had a team depending on me, and I had, an integral role and a leadership position, it just kept me a bit more motivated.
Right. So it sounds to me like there was a support network who would help you during times of hardship. And also the fact that, there's other people relying on you. So if you didn't put in your end of the work, they'd kind of be hooped. But what was actually keeping you there? Because there is kind of like an external thing pushing you there from the team. And there's a support network when times get tough. But what actually kept you there? Like
That's a,
internally, what was it for you?
it's a really good question. Um, for me, I think there was like a lot of like introspection at the time, because since I was probably 19 years old, I wanted to have a startup, and do marketing at the startup, most likely with people that I had met like at university. Um, and then I was like, whoa, I was here. So even when things got kind of tough and the questions of like, is this the right choice or am I happy? Um, it was kind of like, well, this was my dream for so long. Despite everything, I just had to stick out the highs and the lows, because I wanted to see if it was worth it. Like if my dream was that thing I was just kind of fantasizing as a kid watching the entrepreneurs, and you hear the hustle culture. Um, I really wanted to see if it was what I thought it was. Um, so that was honestly like probably the biggest reason I just stuck it out, is because I wanted it since I was a kid. So even if those doubts in my head that maybe I should have listened to sooner, um, it was kind of like maybe I felt like I was already somewhat not stuck on this path, but because I was like I chose it and I wanted it for so long, I
Right.
didn't really know when to
Pull out.
quit or pull
Yeah.
out. Mhm.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was kind of a dream that you wanted to pursue for a long time. And I think even if I asked you the question now, would you agree that you're still happy you went on this? Because you wouldn't know what to do with this kind of feeling of like I should have started this entrepreneurship thing if you didn't.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, the other piece, it was the sunk, I think it's called the sunken cost fallacy, correct? It's kind of like
Yes.
you just invested so much time, so much of your own being into it, and you're like I can't back out now. And that's such a real thing. And is there something you wanted to mention on that?
No, you hit it like nail on the head. It's like losing your money at a casino and trying to win
Yeah.
by more gambling.
Absolutely, man. No, that's a very good point. Okay, that makes a lot more sense for me. So it's the dream that you wanted to go through and also the amount of work you've already put in.
Yeah.
So that kept you through the lows, but tell me, like, what's a normal day-to-day kind of operation for you, as a co-founder of a startup, working already a full-time job and working this?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because the startup started probably around March of 2020, and I started my new role as a junior business analyst. So it'd be my first adult job, quote unquote, in February. So I basically, I don't know, I just hopped on board for everything. I was like, all right, thumbs up, let's start. Let's
Let's start
just do it
adulting.
all. Let's start adulting. Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the question one more time
So the
for me?
question is, what was the normal day-to-day operations for you like?
Um, Honestly, it really depends on like I guess the stage, especially for a startup. My day-to-day operations at the beginning of the startup, or I guess the beginning stages of a startup, I should say, um, was just a lot of research.
Hmm.
So first, you got to check, is there a market for it? So what's the problem that you think you're trying to solve? And then finding out how many people, or how many, I should say, companies, firms, however you want to say it, are currently solving this problem. Um, and then just kind of seeing, well, what's your location? Is that nationally, locally, or is that internationally? Um, and then kind of seeing like how much, well, we call it like your beachhead market. So who's the person that you're trying to immediately solve for? I guess whose problem are you trying to solve the most immediately? Because your product is always going to start kind of small before it's like really big. So, for example, Facebook didn't start with like marketplace. That like people just think that there was Facebook was just a whole different thing before. But they've constantly pivoted. They've added. They've tried new things and taken away things, and like now you have what they are.
Hmm.
It's just the same for a
Right.
startup.
So you try to go for the biggest, I guess, product market fit that fits
Mhm.
the problem you're trying to
Yeah,
solve.
essentially. So a lot of the beginning was just researching, does that exist? It was the big one. And is there enough money in it? Do enough people have this problem? So perhaps there are people making money in this, but if it's a monopoly, or there's just the cost to enter the market would just be way too expensive, uh, then it's not worth it. We have to do
Hmm.
something else, right? So those were like that was the beginning. So like the day to day was just like researching that, and then the day job. So it was funny because I started both at the same time. I could kind of like see the shift for me. Of like I was learning things at my day job through training that I could take and apply to the startup. And then I remember like I could kind of see when it started to shift that I was like learning things from the startup that I could apply to my day job.
Really
Um, but yeah, that was probably like closer when I decided to make the full time. Leave the day job, pursue the startup full time. But
interesting.
yeah.
So before we get onto that point, what were the amazing days like for you? Like, because like the highs and lows. We've talked about the lows. We talked about the regular days. Like, what was the amazing days like?
Um, the amazing days were probably the people. I
What do you mean
mean,
by that?
and it sounds kind of corny, especially when you're thinking of like business. You think profit, you think margins, cutthroat.
Show
Um,
me the money.
yeah, absolutely. Like the Wolf of Wall Street kind of vibes. I'm not going to say it. It doesn't look appealing, to some people. um, but for me, it's just I guess the genuine connections that you make. Plus, when you are helping people and you're trying to like solve a solution, if it works and you can see like in their face, that's fine. But if you didn't, you met so many people like along the way. So, for example, we were always testing, different products or different variations. So through that, we like conducted interviews. I met new people that I wouldn't have met. I've done I managed like I now I know like a bunch of designers and really talented like developers, and like I have like experiences like with that and with them, having like gone through that. So for me, that's probably the best. The highs is the people. I think yeah, it's especially since you can't do everything yourself and you can't really build a company by yourself. So the people make the biggest difference.
That's huge. And, like the people that you know is kind of, in my opinion, I think it's the most important thing in life, not only for your own happiness and sanity, but even if you want to get a future career opportunity or if you want to start another startup in the future, knowing these people is going to make a very big difference because, like you mentioned earlier in the episode, when you wanted to first do your market research, you wanted to have a warm introduction. So, someone who already knows someone else that can say, hey, I know both people, let me introduce you, which makes it easier. And it seems like this opportunity gave you a lot of that and allowed you to grow. And the piece that I really enjoyed was you mentioning that when you first started this job, your full-time job was giving you lessons that you could apply to your business. But right when you were about to go full-time on your business, the business was teaching you things that you could apply to your job. I found
Mhm.
that really fascinating. So, speaking on that very same point, what got you to pull the trigger, snap your finger, and say, I'm going all in?
Um, that's that's it's scary. You know what I mean? For me, I guess I always I read this quote. I don't know, or I guess I always think about a job in paying you twice.
What do you mean by that?
So one is the money that you get now, and then two is the experience that you get for your future money.
Hmm.
So I have to be satisfied in either one or both of these things for me to stay. And if I'm not, can I switch my position or situation where I'm currently at so that I could, increase one of them? Or is it time for me to leave? So, like, for example, when I was at my day job doing my first job as a junior business analyst, so I was the gopher. Um, Anybody that wanted something, it was go for that. Oh, go for this. So a lot of it was just crunching data and making it look pretty on Excel.
Hmm.
They had questions that they wanted, I wonder what this is like. And then for me, I have to, come up with those answers. So that was like a big chunk of my day. So for me, just working with data and doing like research and being exposed to lots of different types of software and technology, even like basic ones like Teams or like different collaboration software for like working in projects effectively.
Mhm.
Um, all that stuff becomes really instrumental when you're the one and like having to try and
Set that
manage and
up.
organize projects. Yeah, so that's big.
Absolutely. And then, so what was the point that got you to just like, what were you think? Like, I'm just curious, like, what was going on in your brain when you were like, okay, I'm going to drop my full time job. I'm going to go full time into my startup. Like, what was that point? And do you remember any of the thoughts that were in your head, how you're feeling?
Yeah, the biggest one was like who quits a full-time job in a pandemic was like the biggest one. I was like, literally, this was the first job that I had that wasn't the classic tropes. Everybody, has that friend that has had like a million jobs and like they're like, no, 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 nobody actually has that job. Like, "Wait, you tried to sell vacuum cleaner? No, nobody does that." It's like I'm that friend. I've tried my hand at everything. Mostly poorly. But I mean, hey, darts on the dartboard. Yeah, the biggest one was like, am I crazy or not? Like, and we're
Am
like,
I
what,
crazy?
what, what am I thinking?
Hmm.
And then the immediate other thing is like, well, which will I regret more? If I stay or if
Right.
I pursue this to kind of see where it goes?
Right.
Um, Even though I was like burnt out and stressed and probably, not, making the most, I wasn't in the best mindset to make rational decisions that impact my future. But still, I was like, which one will I regret more? And, like I was saying, because this is like, what I wanted since I was a kid. Um, I was like, okay, I have to follow this. And then I also kind of thought about, well, this was also after the shift where, oh, I was learning more and getting more experiences that I wouldn't be able to get at like from the startup. I wouldn't be able to get at my day job. And for me, I always value experience almost more than like money. Like I'll take a slightly like lower paying job, still being able to like live, of course.
Mhm.
Um,
Pretty important stuff to live.
yeah, uh, yeah, exactly. For the experience. Although I say that there was definitely like 4 or 5 months where I think I was making negative money. like I,
Negative money.
yeah, 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 like I was being paid like for a grant, but like the money that I was getting wasn't even enough to cover like all of like the car payment and like rent and stuff. So it definitely, I was making negative money. I was like, okay, well, so that was also like a big one too. I was like, how long is this sustainable?
Hmm.
And am I comfortable not making money for 3 to 5 years?
Right.
Because being conservative um, and just kind of realistic, that's how long I think, like super, super conservative, what happens if your baby doesn't make money for 3 to 5 years? Are you okay with that? And is this the baby that you want to devote 3 to 5 years on? For, a dream that I 100% am obsessed with. But I was like, do I like this or do I love this? Um, and when I couldn't tell myself that I loved it enough to dedicate the next 3 to 5 years, at that point I was like, okay, I think it's time to switch. Not only for my better interests, but also because at the end of the day, like I want what's best for the company and the friends that I made there. So I feel like it would be a disservice to remain in a position where somebody else could be perhaps obsessed and thriving and bringing like new creativity, because at that point I was also kind of burnt out,
Yeah.
and being creative on a deadline or sometimes they don't make sense. But yeah, that was the big one. It was, is this where I want to spend the next 3 to 5 years?
Right. It sounds like you had a very analytical approach to this whole thing, which is really interesting. And I think this is going to be very useful for everyone else because, you really just said, do I want to spend 3 to 5 years? Is it for this project that I want to do it? Am I okay not making money for this time? Um, and also the last piece, it was a very compassionate piece on, if I stay here, sure, maybe I could get by, but it's not something that I'm personally thriving in or enjoy too much right now. And maybe someone else can come in, take that position, and help the whole community of the company get forward. I thought that was a very compassionate piece. So, yeah, man, that was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Hey, business is beautiful. It's fun. It's all fun.
Man, that should be a new hashtag. I love it. So, tell me about the transition from turning over from your company to moving into a full-time job again. Did you have any regrets? Were there any thoughts in your head or
um did I have any regrets? Probably not. Everything happened. Um, the way everything happened, like I wouldn't be where I am now, so I can't really say I have that many regrets. I do have like a lot of like nice learning lessons and experiences, and that comes with the hardships, but that comes with like the highs and lows. So uh, and the lows, I will say, sometimes they make the highs a little bit sweeter, so I can hang on to that. And then, so yeah, I can't say like I have any regrets. Sorry, what was the second thing?
the second question? I think I may have forgot too, but let's transition just into how you kind of changed into the role as your full-time job.
Yeah, that was funny because, like I said about each job pays you twice.
Right.
Um, I couldn't have gotten, basically, like I leveraged the experience and the portfolio that I created from the startup to land my current position.
Hmm.
So
Tell me about that. What do you mean by that?
essentially, I had another like year and a half or 2 years of experience where I had, I was leading people, I was directing meetings, I was also doing, I would say, I was involved in marketing of a startup in every step of the way, from like idea and like problem solving to research to content creation, and then like reiterating the content, seeing how it works, and like optimizing. So I had a bunch of new experiences that I could add to the resume, and I also had a portfolio because we had a website, we had a blog that I was working on, and those were all like very real things that I could take to my interviews and be like, hey, these are like examples of like my work. These are some accomplishments that the startup or that we have accomplished, and this is some ways that I've contributed to those accomplishments. Um, yeah, and those were like basically I took all of that, and then it really helped me get my current job, to be honest.
That's incredible. And I think this is a very pivotal point to, you know, chime in on because A lot of people are very scared of failing. Oh, what if I start my entrepreneurships project and I make no money? What if I start it and, people look at me and it drops? It's like, it's not just that. Like you mentioned, Aaron, there's two things. It's either going to pay you money right now or it's going to pay you something in the future. I think you mentioned experience that is going to help you in your future endeavors. And I mean, this is just a clear cut example. It's like, the thing is, a lot of people start at the bottom of a company and work their way up, and that's how they get promoted. But what you've done is you've started for a company. Well, you've worked on your full-time job starting at adult life at the bottom, but you also worked on the side hustle on your actual company for the rest of your day, and you've learned how to work on myriad of fields. So you come to a company, you're like, yeah, I can do anything. I've already led a team. I've worked at every single point. I've been able to work on my own. I've been able to lead a team. I've been able to work with partners, make hard decisions, and get through with it. And I think this is such an important point why people should go for things that they want. If you have an artistic venture you want to do, if you have a business opportunity you want to do, start it, do it. You're going to probably fail, and that's normal. But even if you fail, and I hope that everyone succeeds, you just get so many lessons that you can go forward with. That's incredible, man. I think I'm going to be transitioning here to a different conversation, but is there any points that you want to talk about here before we move on, perhaps on marketing or just anything really?
Honestly, I think you capped up everything really nicely. I would say, look for opportunities, and if you can't find them, create your own.
Perfect. I love that. That's a really good way to change it. So let's shift gears here, and I want to talk about mental health and why it's important for you. We talked about burnout a little bit, but I guess this is a nice transition towards that.
Yeah, I think mental health is something that has become like increasingly important to me as I've gotten older and as I've learned more about mental health and myself. And I think, I can't speak for the entire world, but I had especially during the pandemic when things just became super crazy. Things were changing really quickly, and it was a lot of the fear, uncertainty, and I had a lot of my hobbies, the things that I enjoyed doing, I wasn't able to do in the same way. I definitely felt the negative effects for my mental health. So I was like, okay, this is a really big deal, to the point where it's like I couldn't function as well as I could physically, because I wasn't as well mentally.
Right. And was this the first time you kind of experienced mental health issues?
No.
Or
I
more
think,
severe, you guess, or?
yeah, I would say it definitely peaked during the pandemic. It was a pretty tough couple years pre-pandemic too, because I was living with my grandmother who I was taking care of, and then she passed away. So it was dealing with a lot of that, and then through the ups and downs, and then just as kind of that was, I wouldn't say settling, but I was just finished dealing with certain family responsibilities and obligations to come, when a family member passes, and then pandemic came, and it was okay. So it was a lot of different things were
just
happening
stacking
at
up
the
on,
same time.
yeah, stacking
I
on
was
top
also in
of each
school
other.
at the same time too, so I was like, uh-oh.
Man, and then you decide to get a job and work work for the rest of your time.
Yeah, so it was definitely, it wasn't my first time, but it was still something that was relatively new, especially a few years ago, or
Absolutely.
at least something that I started actively working on.
Absolutely. And you mentioned actively working on. What were the things that you were specifically doing to actively work and to improve your mental health?
First,
First, I'll take a drink of water.
sponsored by water.
Yep.
Agua. First is just talking to people. I don't know. This probably goes back to the whole network thing.
Tell me about it.
Well, just at first it was opening myself up more. That was a whole many years, being okay with not being okay, being okay to be vulnerable sort of thing. That's so that's a whole that was like a few years ago, but
Let's dive into that a little bit. Like, how did you do that? Because I feel like, especially for a lot of men, the stereotype is you have to be a very stoic man, and whatever life throws at you, just take it like a brick. Like,
you know,
what did you do?
I'll be honest, that's what I thought too. So I had to do a lot of, I would say, active unlearning. So first was just like recognizing it, and then kind of recognizing the effects that I was having on me. Because like when I wasn't, like, for example, if something was emotionally jarring, whether it was like anger or extreme sadness, crying, something like that, if I didn't show that, like I won't show my anger, I won't really express it, not really crying, I thought those were victories.
Hmm.
Well, just because I was like, oh, like big strong man, you
Yeah.
probably shouldn't cry.
The old double bicep post to show
Yeah,
the
you got like a
strength up.
little bicep. But recognizing that I wasn't as happy as I could be, or I wasn't as fulfilled, and learning that that wasn't necessarily like a positive or healthy way to think about things. So it was like, you can't, like, for me, I can't change if I can't recognize and see the issue. And then from there, like once I like did learn of those things, and it was just chatting with other people, and first I'll take a big one, like talking to my doctor,
Hmm.
definitely, and then talking to people that I trust first about my issues. So for me, like, especially like my closest friends, it's always that like catch 22. It's like, oh, I always want to like look the best for my best friends, but they're also the ones where I should be able to look my like worst and like be okay, and they're my support network. um, so for me, I think I always had like everyone was like, Aaron's a pretty like super chill guy.
Oh yeah.
But that was,
That's kind of like
inside.
the exterior. What
Yeah,
you're
inside
actually
it's like
feeling.
the overthinking, kind of anxious, kind of, so for me, just letting my friends know, my close social, like my close support network, like, hey, this is like actually how I'm feeling. And they were like they were real ones, because they, of course, like they listen with open ears, and hug me with open arms. So that was like the biggest one, just like telling people close to you that you trust and that support you, um, that you're, hey, not okay, and having issues, because also that also opens up the conversation, um, because most likely somebody else that like close has had similar issues, and then they've also had experience dealing with those issues. So for me, it was like, who do I like? This is how I'm feeling. And then as I was like kind of opening it up, people would open up to me, and then I could ask them, what did you do? Like, what are the things that you did? And maybe like those would work for me. So just trying, I guess, just, yeah, honest conversations.
That's beautiful, man. And you make a very good point. When you bring up these conversations to other people, it's not like everyone's impervious or everyone's just great and we're the only ones that are suffering from poor mental health at times. Everyone goes through this stuff. And when you open about it, you're kind of like, I feel like you're deepening your relationship with others in a way too. And you're allowing that person to be like, okay, he's talking to me about this. I can talk about it with him too. And it's just such a beautiful thing. And I've had the opportunity to do the same thing, and I don't know if I can speak for Aaron, but like my relationships grew so much. Even people that maybe I didn't know for years, we just got a lot closer from it. And obviously we support each other during some tough times. But yeah, no, that's beautiful. Do you mind taking me back to like the first time you did that? Because you do have a very chill demeanor about you, and you're also very tough. Like I was saying in the beginning of the podcast, you do not want to get kicked by this guy. Like, oh my goodness, it's like a katana going through your body. What was that like? Did you have any like? Were you very anxious about it? And looking back at it now, what would you say?
Mm, it's really funny because looking back on it, like now looking back, I can say, oh, that was me kind of like trying to figure out solutions. And I mean, I'm still trying to figure out solutions. But I mean, like back then, it like I probably would have just seemed like I was like stumbling along, like from people, like person to person. I'm like, I feel like crap. What's happening? um, yeah. So but like, yeah, looking back, I mean, can you repeat that one more time?
So when you were in that moment where you were first opening yourself up, you didn't know what to ask, you didn't know who to talk to, you didn't know if you could trust your deep friends. What was kind of your thoughts that was going through your head? Were you anxious to share these with people?
Oh yeah,
And now that those, well, let's stick with that, and then we'll ask the second part to it.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. It was, it was another one of those uncomfortable conversations. Um, I was definitely anxious, and I was, a little bit scared. I'm not sure one how my friends are going to react, um, and how the people are going to like react to me. Because will they still like me if I'm not exactly the same? You know what I mean? I'm not as chill as I might like seem to be, because everybody has good days and bad days. Um, but are they still going to be there? Um, and yeah, and then as well as like having that conversation with like my doctor, it's like uh, just that was definitely scary too, I would say, because of like had like a really long uh, I got like a pretty like long relationship with my doctor, my family doctor.
Mhm.
um,
And were you
and it
just
was
like
also
worried?
it was the first time that I think I was like trying to come to him with a problem that wasn't physical,
Hmm.
and that was really tough to talk about, because it wasn't I didn't know how to talk about it. And that was like a really hard thing. I was just like, hey, I feel like this, like I don't really I feel like I think I feel depressed, or like I'm like sad, I like don't really want to like do things. But that was the first time I was like talking to him about how I felt, rather than like, or mentally, rather than any kind of physical ailment. um, so a lot of it was just you know not having perhaps the right vocabulary to kind of get things across.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, a lot of it was just that, a little anxiety, as well as just like some confusion.
Right. Right. And then I guess as time went on, you practiced your way to express yourself in this manner, got the right solutions for the problems you were having, and improved on it. And I mean, now that you're looking at it, and the reason I'm asking this question is because I still feel like a lot of people are trying to hold these feelings in. What would you say to yourself prior who was holding these things in? How would you talk to your old self who would just want to suck in all the pain and not let it out?
I would say to feel is human, um, but how you act afterwards and how you react, um, I think that matters most.
Right on, man. You're hitting some deep bars on these, eh?
Yeah, and just one more thing to add, it's you know um, there's a difference between uh, being vulnerable and weakness. They're not the same.
Absolutely. And I think vulnerability is actually the opposite of weakness because you're showing people like the most intimate part of you. And that takes a lot of courage because people can use that to really damage someone. And to have the strength to show that to someone is commendable, admirable, and something that I hope everyone has the opportunity to do because life gets hard. And if we keep that part of us coded, we trap ourselves rather than help ourselves. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's going through something,
everyone is. And yeah, Aaron, I think that's a good place to slowly wrap up our show. So I think there's two parts that are left here. The first thing is I'm just going to ask you, what is your one message to the audience? This can be on something that we talked about. It could be on something that we haven't discussed at all. And then after, I'll remind you again. I'm just going to give you room to talk about anything that you'd like to talk about your business helping with search engine optimization and digital marketing. So, prior to that, what is your one message for the audience? It can be on anything we talked about or just anything on your mind right now.
I'll say a couple things. One, I'll just repeat it. You know, put yourself open to opportunities. Um, say yes to things, even if you aren't, even if you don't think you're qualified. Um, who cares? Try it. Um, and I've found like genuinely wanting to add value, whether it be just in people's lives, has only been beneficial to me.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. And that's amazing. So, Arron, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Shout out your social media handles. Where can someone find you if they need help with digital media or search engine optimization? And we'll throw that in the description down below as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody can find me, just my name, Arron Startup, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram.
Perfect. And yeah, so Arron, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about how you worked a full-time job and you were a founder of a company. You really grinded for so long. You took the tips from your job, applied it to your business, and eventually took that business tip, applied it to your company, and eventually took the tips that you got from your company and applied it to your job. And how this job that you were doing so much work in gave you a lot of understanding in your own goal that you wanted to do. It allowed you to grow as a person, increase your network, and improve your understanding. And in the next piece, we talked about mental health, the journey that you had with mental health from starting from an area where you wanted to hold that in to growing to sharing this experience and how that connected you with other people. This was a very powerful episode, man. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your story and your time for coming on to share it with our audience. So thank you so much, Arron, for taking the time.
Hey, thank you. Hey, anything for you.
I appreciate you, man.
I
So
appreciate you.
thank you. So to the viewers and listeners of the Personal Process Podcast, thank you for joining us on another episode, and we'll catch you on the next one. Hey everyone, Param back after another amazing episode with another amazing guest. We hope we added value into your life so you could take the tips from this episode and fuel your process forward. If you enjoyed our episode today and think other friends or family members may also appreciate the lessons that our podcast brings, be sure to share us with them. Subscribe and rate our show so we know how we did. And always remember, trust the process. Awesome.